Hey, I'm Riley, and this is a Superhuman podcast. At Superhuman, we bring you cutting edge insights from health experts and high performers to help you unlock your body's full potential, supercharge your mind, and achieve more with less effort. Do you want to fix nagging issues, boost productivity, spark genius ideas, master stress, build better relationships, and increase your income? It all starts by optimizing your inner machinery. My guest today is Sean Sullivan. Sean is a go to marketing revenue operations leader with over a decade of experience helping companies scale intelligently, not chaotically. He specializes in building end to end GTM systems that align marketing, sales, data, operations into one cohesive engine. He's worked across startups, agencies, and private equity backed companies, helping teams move from fragmented growth to predictable, repeated revenue. His work has driven multiple X ROI, rapid net MRR growth, and data systems that support clear decision instead of adding noise. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Riley. My voice is a little fuzzy as well as my camera is a little fuzzy too. So it's just one of those kind of things where it's just kind of a fuzzy, coarse kind of day.
Yeah, those days definitely happen, even for superhumans. And really, it comes down to content and the content of like what you talk about, what you do in our previous conversations. I think you're just such an in depth kind of guy. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. At first, I was just, wondering, you've
Mhm.
seen growth from startups to PE backed companies. What breaks first internally that you have noticed when a company scales too fast?
It depends upon the stage of the company. So I'll
Mm,
classify it as you've got your early startup, your seed companies.
yeah.
And then you have from like Series A to Series D, and then you go on to like IPO and public, depending upon what that is. Primarily for that startup seed, I've seen a lot of issues where it's based on resources. It's
Mm,
like, how do we narrow down on what the focus is, what that vision is,
mm,
in order to achieve and align it with what customers' expectations are?
mm.
Because you also see this in the agency world too,
Yeah.
where when you first start out, your biggest customers, your biggest pain in the butt customers are going to be, they give you the least amount of revenue, but the most amount of headache and time to fix issues. As you
Mhm.
build more accolade and you build more reputation, that moves over into where they're like, hey, I'll pay you 10 grand a month. Just fix it for me. Because then you can start building that level of trust by showing what you have done personally, as well as how do you interact with other teams.
Mhm.
Flipping that back over to like startups, I would say if you go from Series A to Series D, I'm currently with a Series D company. And what is of interest to me is that it's not about the liquidity of what you're going to get for the investment. That just helps you build the runway. It's like, okay, we've got the runway, we've got time. How are we going to address this? And I see very particularly in the company that I am with now is a lot of the right things are aligning. First and foremost, company's been around and has shown sustainable revenue
Mm.
rather than trying to like put the fuel on the fire and go for it. Eventually you're going to burn out.
Yep.
Something's going to burn out. Also having the right kind of leadership, not only early on is very important to have more of a strategic lens, but as you're growing, you want leadership to mature or change for more of an operational lens in that. So it's
Mhm.
very important to kind of understand, okay, here's the vision here. This is what we're going to set up. Now, how do we find the right personnel? How do we find and how do we build these teams? How do we build these teams in cohesive units in order for them to talk to one another cross departmentally? What are the and what is the misconceptions of who does what is the source of truth in things, and really have pen to paper on every interaction you have with cross departments and making sure that things are well documented. I think that's the last thing people forget is I'm just going to do it and then done. And it's nice to have, I call it like conversational documentation to have things in view
Yeah.
because the systems are going to change. There's going to be several different versions, and it's going to be really hard to notate all of those changes if you really see like how an app is built and all the different
Sure.
versions. But if you see really engineers of how they communicate with one another, it's that communication drives how the app is being built. So
Hmm.
if you back into the communication between other people, it makes it a lot easier to build processes around what is actually important to them, because leadership
Mhm.
doesn't care about the nitty gritty. Sales, they don't care about, you know, certain plays. They want to know, like, what is the best play? What is the best option for me in order to start my day, do my day? What is tier one, tier two, tier three? Like,
Mhm.
what do I work on? So it's really understanding, compared to football, any kind of team, is that, you've got sales and marketing on the field and they're trying to figure out how to get to the goal line. But then
Mhm.
leadership, you know, might cause issues, might change the goal line,
Yeah.
or customers might change the goal line. And so it's a knockout, drag out. If you've ever been on the front line, like rugby, any of those things, like anything that is contact sport, it is a knockout, drag out of the person against you as well as yourself trying to push it. And so
Mhm.
that's why you need your offensive coordinators. That's why you need your sideline coaches. That's why you need QB coaches, all these other coaches, to see things from a different lens of
Mhm.
what's kind of going on in the picture.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think of it like, oh, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's do this. And then you scan it back out and you're like,
Mhm.
no, it's not a good idea because people are not resonating with this, or you're not seeing the longer term vision of what are these small steps in order to get me to the long term.
Yeah, and I it's so true, and I think with all that, you ultimately get clarity, and with that clarity, it's just so much easier to make decisions from the top down.
Yes. It involves a sense of patience. So
Mhm.
I also do investments on the side, and I get into stock, crypto. I even have a Lego collection where, yeah, and I
That's
nerd out.
awesome.
I like to do this kind of stuff. But then
Yeah.
I also think of it as not attaching to the material item. It's
Mhm.
really understanding people's perception and
Yeah.
being patient. And this involves in your career and everything else, is that when you're in your 20s, and I thought back in my 20s, and my 20s were just get things done. I was bull in a
Mhm.
china shop, not realizing, like, okay, I need to stop and figure out what am from what I'm good at, what am I great at?
Mhm.
And then from there, how can I show up every single day? Even if I just improve a little bit, or even if I improve a lot, to give
Mhm.
myself grace in the sense of how can I be consistent
Mhm.
with this? Because I hate the analogy when people are like, well, if you do a little bit better each day, you're going to be this percentage. Here's the thing. As we're younger and when we do things, we probably don't have as much of a bigger impact as when we get older. We understand those neural networks and how to
Mhm.
get to a solution faster. So then we're able to accomplish more. And that's why you see people who become millionaires, billionaires, different things, most likely in their 40s and 50s. I mean, Warren Buffett didn't become a billionaire until later in his life. And
Yeah.
it was a lot to do with, a lot of people are like, oh, it's a knockout, grind out. Like, you have to grind every day. In actuality, if you really
Mhm.
take a step back and you want to be superhuman, you take a step back of what actually matters to you and what can you live with and what can you be patient with in order to not to delay gratification.
Mhm.
And then once you get it, how do you become humble and also develop another skill set? Like, maybe it's money. You know,
Mhm.
it's a very different skill set of making money versus keeping money.
Mhm.
If you talk to someone who, you know, it's the lottery, issues that people win the lottery and they don't know how to manage money. But if you see people who come from money and old money,
Yeah,
there's a very different mindset in the sense of,
totally.
you know, how do they work the money? It's not just
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm just gonna, spend it all, but it's like, how can I put things into other areas where I can see growth and I can
Mhm.
see appreciative growth within this while I'm doing other things. I mean, it's called, like,
Mhm.
what was it? Mailbox money. Like, anytime that you invest in the property or do something,
Yeah.
you get a check in the mailbox. And that always fascinated me, and not just the investment side, but how do you do it on the system side? And the
Mhm.
system side is very indicative of time.
Mhm.
It is. I was talking to my direct report, my current company, and she was mentioning another leader who worked for a competitor, and he's over here now. And she's like, he was mentioning that they had, 4 to 600 people from India doing do what I do years ago.
Hmm.
And I said, so, and they were manually doing it and
Wow.
going through things, but they weren't building the systems in order to automate it. Is it going to be perfect? No, but there's also error in, you know, maybe not in the data sometimes, but it's error in the time efficiency of velocity for the account to work. Like if you can
Mhm.
get it to, I like to go the rule, like get it to 90%
Yep.
with a sometimes with a 5% deviation and hand that off to an SDR, they'll complete
Mhm.
the rest. But it takes away, gives them so much more time back to be laser focused of saying, well, this is what's
Yep.
wrong with this account. This is wrong. Like, here are the contacts that I need. And then you bucket that.
Mhm.
And then you get iterative feedback in order
Mhm.
to constantly improve rather than let's wait until everything's built and it's perfect. No, like you have to
Yeah.
modularize in
Yeah.
buckets in order
Yeah.
to and always be focused on that end solution. And so that's where
Yeah.
that kind of reverse engineering comes into play.
And that's a system in itself. And when you have that system, then you can then scale your time and focus on what you're best at. So it's best for everybody. And I've been trying to adopt that too in terms of Superhuman, of
Mhm.
everything I do, like if it's sending an email newsletter or anything else, of actually doing a loom so I can pass it off to somebody and show them how to do it, or at least start the process. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be perfect. And I never realized that years ago. And I think, wow, how much time could I have saved doing something like that? So fascinating. Now you're really a big data guy, and that's what I want to dive into here.
Mhm.
How do how do most companies misuse data, and how should leaders actually be using it to reduce stress instead of creating more noise?
That's a really interesting question because I have seen things from the route of engineers who are in the thick of it
Mm,
versus leadership who sometimes like the majority are not are have never been in the thick of it. So they don't
mm,
understand. And there's engineers who have been in leadership positions of the intricacies of trying to manage departments, investor relations, whatever that may be. And I was lucky enough in my career that I was able to bridge that gap and I'm able to talk both languages. Am I as experienced as an engineer? No. Am I as experienced as someone in leadership? Not yet. But eventually, I want to get to a point where I'm like, I've been there. It's almost kind of like, I became a professional athlete and now I can, and not all professional athletes can coach, but the ones that really understand the game from a political sense of like, how do I help, like work with one another? You see them as coaches, you see them as coordinators, you see them
yeah,
excel in those positions because they have an aptitude and IQ, a high IQ of like, how does this all work?
mhm,
And so I don't think it's necessarily a data, it is a core data issue, but it's a core data issue of understanding what data is in the sense
mm,
that it's not the next shiny object. It's not agentic. Like I know Salesforce, sent things out about agentic. Here's all the stuff, but you have to take a step back and say, okay, is our data standardized enough so that we can run automated sequences?
mhm,
And if it is, what are those workflows and those automated sequences in order to build properly? A lot of times there's just like a lot of deaf people go in there. They don't have, sometimes a clear idea. Um, and it's just building that stronger communication from top down and
mhm,
from bottom up, giving iterative feedback of this is where I think we're going and having really good leadership of, not pulling people along, but say, hey, you know, how can I help you?
mhm,
And removing barriers. And that's where you see the really good leaders.
yeah,
And in that and the data itself, I had a conversation with a professor at my alma mater years ago. And he told me, he was like, we're teaching Python and regression or R. He says, so we're building databases and then we're going to build predictability. And I looked at him, I said, why are you teaching SQL?
mm,
And he says, He says, why would you say that? I said, most companies are not that sophisticated to already build databases because
Mm,
everything can be decentralized. New people come in. There's a change of the guards. Everybody has their own way of doing something, and everybody has their way of saying this is a best practice versus stepping away and saying, okay, how do we be data agnostic? Like,
yeah.
how do we understand what the core situation is of the data and not bring another tool in, but bring in stronger processes and stronger communications around that? And so when I mentioned to him, I said, yeah, most companies need SQL because their data is crap. It's shit. It needs to be standardized, and then there needs to
Mhm,
be a coming to Jesus moment in
mhm,
order to start making sure that the databases are talking to one another within
yeah.
systems. And so it's like, hey, let's take a few steps back in order to take a leap forward. It's just trying to reassess, what are those core objectives?
Yeah. And this can be across all departments. It could be marketing, could be sales, could be ops. So for you, why do you think those teams stay misaligned? And like what's one change that could just fix it the fastest?
I think I cannot imagine anybody being in a leadership position because I feel like it's really hard in the sense you're in meetings, you're trying to handle other tasks. You don't have the time or you don't have the bandwidth to really dive into stuff. So I really think the importance out of that is like, let's just say you are at a C level. You need to hire really good VPs because those people are going to hire really good directors. And then those directors are going to hire really good people in the sense that it's not about like how many years of experience you have. It's
Right.
about what did you do with those years? Like, how did you
Mhm.
grow? What did you do? What is your framework of how you think and how you think through things? Like, how do you critically think through situations? Because having that alignment and seeing that at a really good company that does that, what happens is like independent contributors like me, like I'm an architect, but I'm behind the screen fixing and solutioning and figuring that out. My
Mhm.
director, she handles the meetings or if I get a pop up on Slack and they said, hey, I talked with my direct report. They said, hey, could you help us with this? Then I know it's of the utmost importance. And it's like, okay, how do I reprioritize? Because I like to block off sections. I hate multitasking. There's a lot of studies out there where multitasking actually your brain just cannot switch dials that
Yep.
quickly, or if it can, it's not sustainable.
Yep.
And so having each level above, reducing the time that is in unnecessary meetings, like basically wasting time and
Mhm.
giving consensus breakdown
Mhm.
of what needs to happen, but also making sure that independent contributors, all the people in the thick of it, you're able to roll up that information to leadership in a way that they can digest it and they can build a narrative around it. And I
Yeah.
think with a lot of like, oh, I feel like I'm a chicken with my head cut off. Then they're like, okay, well, ask what you want from your direct report. What's the best way for me to communicate? And that's what I asked my direct report. And then she gives me the solution of like, well, I have to talk to my VP about this. Can we,
Mhm.
you know, give more of a canopy view of this view? Cause he's not going to be in everything. I'm like,
Right.
okay. On the flip side, I'm doing a shadow thing this month with our SDRs because
Mhm.
I want to know the processes, boots on the ground, what the heck is going on.
Mhm.
And one of them actually replied back to me today. And he's like, are there any specific questions you have? And I said, no, I said, here's the itinerary because I just want to shadow them and
Mhm.
get to experience what they had experienced because then
Yeah.
the questions will come. But that's
Right.
what happens is people just assume and then they just go and do
Mhm.
versus if you are in that flow state and being superhuman,
Mhm.
it's not about anxious preparedness.
Mhm.
It is assuredness going into something and allowing things to unfold and then taking what you need from that. And
Mhm.
I ask like anybody I like interview or talk to is like, if it's like an in-depth conversation, I said, may I, turn on the AI notes taker? Because then I can go back through, I can massage it. Oh, did I miss something?
Mhm.
Um, when I was listening, or that's what I would do with the SDRs. I literally told them, I said, if you're okay for me to record this, I'm actually going to combine it all. I got some AI prompting where I'm like, hey, I just need the TLDR of this. I need this. And if I notice patterns, that's where that is where the core essential of creating and improving those gaps, because
Mhm.
they might have said it and not realize it. I might not have caught it. But if you can catch that stuff and then see the patterns, then you can start really understanding what the core gaps of the processes are, as well as what should we offload on folks who are
Mhm.
manually entering in information or looking up information.
Amazing. I'm sure founders, just you saying that, felt a sense of ease of just having those systems in place, the clarity is there, energy is there when there's that leverage in their business. So out of all these, what would be the first system they should fix if they want to grow and feel lighter instead of heavier?
I would say get whatever system it is, whether it's product, business, whatever that is, to make that your central point of truth. A
Mm.
lot of people that I've noticed when they build systems is they think very linearly. They're like,
Yep.
I'm going to connect this system to this and to this. And the companies that recognize the problem of where do we fix the moment of truth, a lot of it is like your CRM, Salesforce, all these other ones. But when you really look at it, it's almost kind of like treating a patient or how a doctor treats a patient. Let's like look at the whole body.
That's right.
Okay. And then they take out different portions of like, let's focus in on things. What are the symptoms?
Mhm.
And really, especially sometimes you need like, I call it like, I don't call it, but it's like a workflow transplant. Like you want to see what's going on with the workflow internally, take
Mhm.
it out. You utilize systems that build really great orchestration, because then you can start tinkering around and constantly, like, I have a thing that I'm like on version 4 or 5 of improving our net new accounts and finding that and doing different things, but I had to learn how to, I had to learn to understand the build in order to build the modularity of what the data was giving to me, of like,
Yep.
because if I just built that in Salesforce,
Mhm.
it would take a lot longer. And
For
so
sure.
it's like, how do I build out this section in order to do this? And once I get into a good spot, how do I standardize it in the sense of building a narrative? Like, I don't want to like do this, do this. Like, I don't want to give out the steps, but I want to say like, hey, I color code these columns. Here's the color code.
Smart.
Here's the reason why I do that. And
Yep.
here's the data that I provided. Here's the sequence of
Yep.
the modularity of me pulling in refining systems in this outside orchestration, because
Mhm.
then I can just pull that data back in. And sales, marketing, they don't need to know all of that. My
Yep.
team does, leadership does, but they just want the, like, what's bare minimum, what's a counts as a good account for you. And we found out that these SDRs are hustlers. Like, they know how to grind. They just needed to know certain key information. And so we wanted to provide more information, but it was stalling
Mhm.
efforts. Now we're
Uh,
realizing, how do you balance that? How do you find good enough accounts, make lookalikes off of those, or understand their processes and procedures to the point where I talked to the SDR managers the other day, and they're like, well, let's just work this. Let's refine it and work it, knowing what we knew know now that versus what we knew then. And
Mhm.
if we do need to expand after a couple weeks, they're going to collect the information and we're going to track it, but we're going to collect information of like, maybe that person is no longer at the company, or
Mhm.
maybe they have exhausted it. And I said, before you put it as a recycled reason to exhaust, send me a list. Let me see if I can find other people that are at that company,
Mhm.
because then we could do our due diligence of really making sure that that account is exhausted
Yep.
after we talk, or we try to talk to 3, 4, 5 people or more versus one. because
Mhm.
they may not be the decision maker. Maybe they're not the company anymore. And so it's a land and expand and not a pray and spray
Yeah.
kind of aspect, because even that little bit of time, extra time on the account builds so much quality in the
Mhm.
data that I describe it as, if you ever, like, everybody's probably volunteered, but you see people who volunteer and it looks like they're doing something, but they're not producing anything. And I
Mhm.
think that's where people get in that stalemate of like, well, they said this, and then it becomes a
Yeah.
cycle of not getting to a solution or not
Mhm.
showing results out of the effort. And if there's ways to do that in increments, small
Yeah.
little changes into things, and really putting yourself into somebody else's shoes with, like, you were like, I want to help them, do it all. But I'm like, let me figure out what's an important count to them. Like, what do
Yeah.
they see? Because then that helps me. Okay, I can do this. I can add this. I can add this step. And
Mhm.
so within like the front end, it's going to be more time. But
Mhm.
in the long term, we're not going back into old patterns. We're not going back into old things where, like, well, these accounts are bad and this is this and this system's bad versus, no, here's the gap, here's the problem. And you can literally diagnose it and showing, let's pull out this variable, let's put in this variable. But it's essentially getting that core aspect in there, because then by, year's end, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I accomplished this so much because I prepared, I planned." It's like a Olympic athlete. Like, some people are like, "Oh, I can run that fast." I said, "Do
Mhm.
you know how much preparation it took,
Tons.
like, for Usain Bolt to run the fastest 100 meters? Decades. He was training for that every single day." Like, and I and that is, I think, what's missed is seeing how much preparation when it gets into place in order to accomplish something. And it's not
Mhm.
just individual preparation. It's the whole company's preparation and evolvement. I mean, if you think about it, companies are an ecosystem of people.
Yep.
So and I think it stems down to finding the right people at the right stage. That's why you don't see very many unicorns, or even if you do see
Mhm.
unicorns, you see some people that have been burned along the way. And so it's really recognizing, not, again, not putting all your chips on, but really understanding how to leverage and pull experiences and profits and understanding out, so that you can start understanding what life you want to build
Mhm.
versus life trying to dictate your happiness.
Yeah. It's all on your terms. Love it. Love it, Sean. Thank you for coming on today. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they visit?
They can just hit me up on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I am currently possibly rebuilding out Converge Coffee this year. I took a little hiatus from interviewing folks, because I've just been in build mode and
Yeah.
refinement mode and just out there. And eventually my hope is with, with some of these investments, I want to turn around and make a small little venture firm to
Mm.
help, really good people, really good companies have that runway to experiment, have that runway, and, and I get, whatever the profitability is coming back from them. Hopefully it's good, but making sure I'm diversifying and hedging my bets, but seeing this as an extension of my core of who I am, because I love to give, and I'm techie and I'll talk about this stuff, but I'm also an introvert. And
Mm.
so it's one of those things where I've understood where I really excel and what, and I've tried a lot of different things. I've done public speaking, I've done that, but then realizing, let's try all of this. And that's what your 20s and younger is all about, because then you get to the point where, this doesn't fill my cup, but I can hire somebody to do this
Yeah.
and do it way better than I can. And so I really understood what kind of leadership style I've become. So out of this, as well as, like, how do I want to contribute? Like, work should not, at the end of the day, your identity should not be tied solely on work
Mm.
and your effort. And I see so many people in previous generations, that's what happens.
Yeah.
And then you see, you know, people passing away soon after retirement because they don't have anything to keep them. And I'm like, you have to focus in on you. You're a human
Mhm.
being. You're not a human doing, you're a human being.
Mhm.
So find ways to build those extensions, even if you don't have time, if you have family, kids, whatever that may be. I just say, with anything you do, spend 15 minutes a day on something, whether that could be, reading a book, reading a journal, just doing something like for some of your, superhuman exercises are like 15 minutes, like meditation, just small little things, because then you will start to understand building those good habits out of replacing it with a bad habit.
Mhm.
So rather than like, I'm going to scroll through, social media, be like, I'm going to scroll through social media, but follow the people that I like in, a certain category like Legos or whatever that may be. Or like me, I took some weekends and I'm like, oh, I can update the product SKUs and
Mhm.
aggregately and help sellers and do all this stuff, as well as look at my own collection and see what the value is, why I can just open it up and I don't have to manually do things. And so it gets to the point where I'm like, I can just open my investments and it pops us up,
Sure.
it runs, and then I know exactly where things are at. It's like I'm not scrounging around the house. I'm like, where did I put that? Or the junk drawer. Everybody had the junk drawer. I'm like, I'm gonna scrounge.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm like, I'm gonna intentionally put time now because later it's gonna save.
Mhm. Love it,
So
Sean. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for tuning in today. I'm sure you got a lot out of what Sean had to say today, as I did as well. And just like all of our talk, Sean, if you guys are ready to take your health and performance to the next level, you can grab our free Superhuman guide at getsuperhuman.io/playbook. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and I'll see you in the next episode. Stay superhuman.